Hi everyone, I'm the narrator, your guide to a peaceful night's rest. If you're here to unwind, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more soothing content. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Now settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin our journey to relaxation. My name is Ricardo Hernandez. I'm 32 years old, and the experience I'm about to share happened back in 1994. At that time, I lived in a small Midwestern town where everyone knew each other. I worked as a mechanic, spending my days fixing old cars and motorcycles. To be honest, I was never superstitious and never really believed in anything supernatural or ghostly, until this experience completely changed my view of the world. It was early September and the leaves were just beginning to turn yellow. My friend Roy had a little cabin in the woods about an hour's drive from town. He called me one day to say his generator had broken down and asked if I could come out and fix it. That wasn't unusual for Roy. He was always tinkering with something, so I readily agreed and set off that Friday afternoon. The drive was beautiful. Bright sunshine and crisp autumn air flooding through the windows. Roy's cabin sat deep in a dense forest. When I pulled up, he was outside chopping wood. Spotting me, he raised his axe overhead and called out, "Hey, Jax, you finally made it!" "How could I miss this?" I laughed. "Is that generator ready for me?" He nodded and led me around to the back of the cabin. The place was small but cozy, if you could call it that, jammed full of all kinds of odd bits and pieces that Roy collected. I knelt by the generator and listened. It was making a strange knocking noise, so I knew it wouldn't be a quick job. While I worked, Roy began telling a local legend about a mysterious creature in the woods called the Forest Man, rumored to be behind several disappearances over the years. I shook my head and chuckled. "Come on, Roy, you don't actually believe that stuff, do you?" He shrugged. "I'm not sure I do either, but the old-timers in town swear by it, and strange things do happen out here sometimes." We spent the entire afternoon fixing the generator, swapping stories about our younger days. By the time we finished, dusk had fallen. Roy invited me to stay the night, and I gratefully accepted. Over cold beers inside the cabin, we reminisced until it was well past midnight. That's when we heard it. A sudden crack like a heavy branch snapping underfoot. Roy stood up and I followed him to the window, peering out into the darkness. All we could make out were the vague shapes of trees. "Probably just a deer," Roy whispered, though he sounded unconvinced. We returned to our seats, but the noise didn't stop. It grew closer, now unmistakably like heavy, slow footsteps. I tensed, grabbed my flashlight, and said, "All right, that's definitely not a deer. Let's check it out." Roy swung his rifle up, and together we stepped outside. The night air was unusually cold and eerily quiet, making every sound seem magnified. I swept the flashlight beam across the forest floor but saw nothing. Then we heard it again, this time clearly coming from deeper in the woods. Roy hissed, "Stay close. Don't split up." With that, we moved forward, step by cautious step, toward the source of the sound. The flashlight's beam carved a shaft of light through the darkness as we edged forward, tension knotting every muscle. Minutes later, the beam fell upon something strange. A figure that resembled a person yet wasn't quite human. Its limbs were long and grotesquely twisted, its hunched frame outlined by two faintly glowing eyes. "Oh my God, what is that thing?" I blurted. Without hesitation, Roy leveled his rifle and fired. The report cracked through the trees, and the creature let out a shrill, inhuman scream. In an instant, it spun and vanished into the black woods at a speed that seemed impossible. "Did you hit it?" My heart pounded in my ears. Roy's voice shook. "I don't know, but it sure won't let us off easy." We bolted back to the cabin, slammed the doors and windows shut, and Roy settled beside the wall clutching his rifle. That night, neither of us slept. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves outside sent us jumping to our feet. At first light, we forced ourselves outside to investigate. There, stamped into the soft earth, was a single line of deep, wide footprints. Nothing like any animal tracks we knew. Roy stared at them and said, "Let's follow these tracks." I grabbed his arm. "No way, we don't know what it is. It's too dangerous. Let's call the cops." He shook his head. "And tell them we saw a monster? They'll think we've lost our minds." Reluctantly, I agreed. We spent the day fortifying the cabin, trying to push the terror from our minds. But when night fell again, the unsettling sounds returned, this time louder, more insistent, as though the thing was determined to break in. Roy snapped. He grabbed his rifle and growled, "That's it, I'm going after it." I tried to stop him, but his resolve was rock solid. Together, we stepped outside into an eerie stillness that seemed to smother the forest. We crept toward the tree line. Then, closer than before, the creature reappeared in the moonlight. Its skin was a pallid stretch over protruding bones, its hollow, pitch-black eyes fixed upon us with dead intensity. Its face was almost featureless. No nose, only two small holes. An image so grotesque it made my blood run cold. Roy lifted his rifle to fire, but the creature moved with terrifying speed, faster than I could have imagined. In the blink of an eye, it was upon Roy, knocking the gun from his hands, then using its long, nightmarish claws to seize him and drag him into the dense woods. "Roy!" I screamed, sprinting after them, but there was no way I could match its incredible pace. In moments, they had vanished into the darkness. Panic seized me. My thoughts scattered as fear overwhelmed every fiber of my being. I couldn't abandon Roy, but charging blindly into the pitch-black forest would only be suicide. Gritting my teeth, I dashed back to the cabin, bolted the doors and windows, and armed myself with a knife and my flashlight. I dared not close my eyes, instead huddling in terror until dawn. Hours crawled by in absolute silence outside. Only when the first pale light of dawn broke through did I find the courage to drive back to town and race to the sheriff's office. I burst in and breathlessly recounted everything to Sheriff Wilson, an old friend of my father's. He listened with a skeptical expression, then finally said, "Jax, this sounds impossible, but I'll send deputies to check it out." I waited in anxious suspense for hours until two deputy sheriffs returned, faces grave. They reported the cabin's doors and windows wide open, signs of a struggle on the floor, and Roy's rifle abandoned. Yet no blood or other clues were found. Sheriff Wilson patted my shoulder, his tone sympathetic but his eyes unconvinced. "Whatever happened out there, we'll get to the bottom of it," he promised. But his doubt was plain. Days passed with no word of Roy. The sheriff's investigation turned up nothing. He was officially listed as missing, then presumed dead. Rumors swirled through town, some whispering that I had something to do with Roy's disappearance. Their suspicious stares tormented me. Worst of all, I lacked any way to fully describe the creature, deepening the air of mystery. I tried to return to a normal life, but every night I jolted awake, haunted by those empty black eyes that refused to fade. I was certain the creature still lurked in the forest's shadows, watching and waiting for its next moment to strike. Months later came the next report. Another person had vanished near Roy's cabin. A hiker this time. Search parties found only those now familiar eerie footprints in the underbrush and nothing else. It seemed the creature had claimed yet another innocent life. Plagued by guilt and confusion, I decided to return to the cabin, if only to find some clue, however small, that might ease the turmoil in my mind. When I arrived, the place felt frozen in time, just as I'd left it that terrible night. I followed the still vivid footprints back into the woods, retracing our steps bit by bit. The deeper I went, the denser the shadows grew and the air turned bone-chilling. An irrational dread crept in, as if the trees themselves were closing in, my heart pounding in my chest. Then it appeared again. It stood silently in a small clearing, those dark, hollow eyes locked on me, utterly motionless. It was as if it had always been there, patiently awaiting my return. I raised my rifle, but my hands trembled so violently I could barely aim. I yelled, "What the hell are you?" My voice rang through the empty forest. The creature made no reply. It began to move toward me, slowly, deliberately, inch by inch. My pulse thundered in my ears, and my finger instinctively squeezed the trigger. The first shot struck the ground at its feet, spraying dirt into the air. It staggered briefly, but didn't retreat. Unfazed, it continued its advance. Forcing myself to calm down, I took careful aim and fired again. This time the bullet tore into its shoulder. It let out that same inhuman, ear-splitting roar and hurled itself at me with terrifying speed. I spun and fled, adrenaline propelling me through the underbrush, my panicked breaths echoing in my ears. I didn't stop until the cabin loomed back into view. I slammed through the door and locked it with all my strength. Outside, the forest fell silent once more, as if death itself had settled over the trees. The creature did not follow. In that instant, it seemed to abandon the chase. I didn't sleep all night, and at dawn's first light, hands still shaking, I unlocked the door and sprinted to my car. I never looked back. That nightmare has haunted me for years. Even after moving to another town and starting anew, the fear lingered. I still hear rumors now and then. Another person gone missing in those woods. Each time I think back to that night, to those empty black eyes and that corpse-pale figure, and a shiver runs down my spine. Years later, I still think back to that night and wonder, if I had never accepted Roy's invitation, would any of it have happened? But deep down, I know it wasn't chance. Something watches over that forest, waiting, like a hunt that belongs only to the night. I moved to another state, took a new name, and cut all ties with the woods. I even quit my outdoor job and took work at a city garage. On the surface, I lived like anyone else, calm and ordinary. No one knew that each night I needed strong liquor to fall asleep, just to suppress the terror replaying in my dreams. Once I dreamed I was back at that cabin. Roy stood at the door, his face streaked with blood, yet he spoke to me calmly. "You should come back too. It's been waiting for you." I woke in a sweat so soaked the pillow was drenched. Outside, the moonlit tree shadows seemed to stare at me. In time, I tried to put the memories down on paper, hoping to lighten the burden on my mind. I wrote every detail I could recall, the screams, my pounding heart. But whenever I tried to describe the creature itself, my pen would stop. Its form twisted in my memory, impossible to fix, leaving only a vague, bone-chilling impression. I gave my notes to a friend who writes investigative pieces. He's fascinated by urban legends and folklore. After I finished telling him my story, he was silent for a long while, then said, "What you encountered may be beyond human understanding." He mentioned legends like the Wendigo, the forest shadow, even forbidden beings in old Native American lore. I wanted to laugh it off, but the image of those black, empty eyes kept me from any relief. A few days later, he brought me a newspaper cutting, a brief report of a disappearance in Yellowstone National Park just 3 days earlier. A couple vanished, their tent ripped open, their shoes left outside the campsite, and nearby those same strange footprints. My hand tightened involuntarily around the paper as a chill ran down my spine. That night I had the clearest dream I've ever had. I stood at the edge of that familiar forest in perfect silence. No breeze, no rustle of leaves. The trees rose like walls, forming a bottomless corridor of darkness. In the dream I had no rifle, no flashlight, not even shoes, as if stripped of every defense. I stepped forward and faint whispers began to swirl around me as though dozens of voices discussed me in secret. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt their greed and judgment. Then a mist crept in, obscuring everything ahead. Through the fog, the creature emerged, not hiding, not distant, but right before me. It reached out a hand, not human, not animal, but something eroded by time, burdened with the weight of ages. Its eyes were bottomless, like two spiraling vortices pulling me into a chaos of eternal gaze. I woke drenched in sweat, my nails digging into the mattress. In that moment, I understood. It hasn't forgotten me. It never forgot. After that dream, I began paying close attention to anything related to the forest man. From local forum posts to yellowed investigation notes tucked away in library corners, if there was the slightest hint, I dug into it. The more I investigated, the more I realized that the legend of this creature was far more widespread than I'd imagined. Not only in Yellowstone, but similar disappearances, strange footprints, and nights filled with silent terror have been reported in the Adirondacks, in Redwood National Park, and even in the primeval forests of Maine. These places share one thing in common. They're remote, with no cell service. A world cut off from the outside. Some old newspapers obliquely described unexplained animal attacks, while other files were simply filed as unsolved cases. They all share one feature. The victims are never found, and any survivors who speak of the creature give only fuzzy, unfocused descriptions. No one can recall its appearance with clarity. I began to suspect that this being was not some evolutionary oddity, but a predator from another plane of existence. It lives at the edge of our perception, moving like a shadow, crossing over only in the loneliest moments to hunt its next prey. Once in the depths of an obscure online forum, I found an anonymous post written in broken fragments. But a few lines seared themselves into my mind. It is neither animal nor ghost. It exists beyond the boundary between reality and dream in the seam of day and night. Once you see it, it has already chosen you. A chill ran down my spine as I read that. I had seen it with my own eyes. I had heard its voice, its breathing, even felt the proximity of its claws. Did that mean it had already marked me? Or more frighteningly, had it never intended to leave me behind? Afterward, strange things began happening in my home. Windows would open by themselves at night. I'd hear footsteps on the floor with no one there. My dog, normally loyal and fierce, went berserk one night, clawing at the door until it broke a window, then ran off into the darkness and never returned. The neighbors whispered that I'd lost my mind and started to avoid me. I even began to wonder if this ordeal had shattered my sanity. But just as I was on the brink of collapse, a new lead emerged. 3 campers mysteriously vanished in a forest in Oregon. The police report noted that they found huge footprints unlike any known animal in the soft earth. I knew then that I could no longer run away. This wasn't just a chance encounter, nor merely some legendary monster at work. It was like an infection. Once you come into contact with it, it seeps into every corner of your life, consuming your nights, your sanity, even your most basic trust in the world. I decided to go to Oregon, not because I thought I could defeat it, but because I had to face it, even if that meant I would never come back. I retrieved that old rifle and dug out the notebook where I'd recorded my dreams and every detail of those nights. I wrote down everything, even the things I dared not tell another soul. Like how sometimes when I looked in the mirror, I'd see a vague, towering silhouette standing just behind me. When I arrived at that Oregon forest, I rented a car, turned off my phone, and walked in alone. The trees rose like walls, blocking almost all sunlight. The ground was damp as if untouched for years. A sickly, sweet rot hung in the air as if something was decaying, but I saw nothing. I found the remains of the campsite, discarded backpacks, a shredded tent, patches of blood and drag marks, and footprints. Those prints tightened my chest with recognition. I knew it was close. I crouched and studied them. The toes were unnaturally long, sharp at the tips, like a fusion of hoof and claw. They trailed along the path into the deeper gloom, and at a bend near a tree root I spotted a piece of torn fabric, a blood-stained scrap of blue flannel, identical to the one I'd seen in Yellowstone. A chill raced up from my feet. I looked up, and there it was. It didn't move, only stared. Its hollow eye socket seemed bottomless, swallowing my courage inch by inch. I raised the rifle, hands shaking, but I didn't pull the trigger. I didn't know where to aim or if it would even matter. Slowly it lifted one hand and pointed at my feet, then at itself. The motion was deliberate and uncanny, as if mimicking human gesture but devoid of any emotion or logic. In that moment I understood it wasn't a mere beast, but a conscious entity. Perhaps it wasn't just hunting us, it was trying to communicate. I don't remember how I escaped the forest. I only know I woke up in a hospital bed, battered and bruised, the deputies telling me a hiker had found me. And the forest had once again left no trace. Even now, when the night is still, I hear its footsteps echoing at the edge of my dreams, and I know it's still out there, it has always been there. I'm not sharing this for sympathy or attention. I only want you to know that beyond our familiar world, there are horrors that defy explanation. The forest man isn't just a campfire story to frighten children, it's real. The only reason I'm alive to tell it may be that it spared me, for now. But it waits in those dark ancient woods, patiently stalking its next prey. Perhaps next time that prey will be you. My name is Adam Dominguez. I'm 33 years old, born and raised in Montana. And I've known the wilderness like the back of my hand since I was a child. In the summer of 2008, I was serving as a park ranger in Yellowstone National Park. By then, I was used to the routine of park life. Hardly anything ever surprised me. But one morning that summer changed my life forever. At daybreak, the sun was just cresting the ridgeline of the Absaroka Mountains, its soft light spilling over frost-tipped grass. I sat on the porch of the ranger cabin with a steaming cup of coffee, savoring the calm. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. Javier, a visitor's run into trouble near Hell-Roaring Trail. Says he saw something strange. Strange sightings are almost always misidentified wildlife. I grabbed my gear and drove out. At the trailhead, I found a visibly shaken, middle-aged man. He trembled as he introduced himself. Ranger, my name's Robert. I swear I saw something terrifying. Must have been a bear, I said, trying to reassure him. They can move fast and spook you. No, he shook his head. It was walking upright. Its arms nearly dragged on the ground, and its eyes glowed in daylight. Half skeptical, I agreed to accompany him. But as we hiked the trail, the forest was unnaturally silent, as if every creature held its breath. At the spot he'd pointed out, we found clear footprints in a snapped sapling, but no sign of other animals. I was about to calm him and turn back when out of the corner of my eye I saw it emerge. It stepped slowly from the trees and I got my first clear look. Balding forward, its limbs bent at impossible angles, its joints defying any known anatomy. Its skin was a sickly gray-brown, textured with matted fur and scale-like patches. Even in full sunlight, its eyes glowed with an eerie, unearthly light that seemed to pierce straight through me. Fear seized me. Instinctively, I reached for my radio, but before I could call in, the creature lunged. With one effortless swipe of its razor-sharp claws, it seized Robert. He screamed as it hoisted him into the air, then opened a maw lined with jagged fangs and sank them into Robert's neck and shoulder. Blood sprayed in an instant. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. I stumbled backward, dropping the radio. The creature turned toward me, its muzzle dripping crimson, and let out a low, blood-curdling growl. I immediately turned and ran, terror completely overwhelming my reason. Behind me came the creature's heavy, urgent footsteps. It was closing in fast. I stumbled desperately through the woods and fell hard to the ground, my knee torn open by a branch. The pain was fierce, but my will to survive drove me to my hands and feet, and I scrambled on. Just as I felt despair, I burst out onto a cliff's edge. Below roared the Yellowstone River, its torrent smashing against the rocks in a deafening roar. The creature's footsteps suddenly stopped. I looked back. It stood only a few paces behind me, as if sizing me up. In that moment, I realized there was nowhere left to run, and I closed my eyes, bracing for that final strike. But it never came. I opened my eyes to find the creature gone, and an unsettling stillness had reclaimed the forest. Bleeding and shaken, I made my way back to the ranger station and called for help with a trembling voice. When the other rangers arrived, they found only my terror-stricken form. Though I recounted everything I had witnessed, the search team found no sign of Robert and no trace of any creature. They concluded I'd been attacked by a bear and frightened badly. No one believed what I'd seen. In the days that followed, my life unraveled. I was suspended pending investigation, my colleagues whispering behind my back, questioning my sanity. I knew I could never return to the life I'd known. I left Montana trying to bury that nightmare, but no matter where I moved, I was awakened each night by the same terror, the fluorescent eyes, the blood-dripping maw, that unnameable dread. I began searching for answers. The old-timers weren't surprised by my story. They spoke in hushed tones of legends passed down through generations. They said it was an ancient being hidden here long before Yellowstone became a park, hunting intruders without leaving a trace. Then I learned of another disappearance, a group of campers on Hell Roaring Trail. They were found the next day with only a shredded tent and inexplicable footprints in the dirt, footprints identical to those I'd seen that morning. I knew then that the creature still lurked here. Unable to live in perpetual uncertainty, I resolved to return to Yellowstone, if only to reclaim a shred of peace. I drove those familiar forest roads alone back toward Hell Roaring Trail. The forest remained lush and serene, as though nothing had changed. Yet I knew that beneath its calm veneer lay an unspeakable horror. When I stepped onto that clearing, now blanketed in fresh grass, I could still feel as clearly as if it were yesterday the shadow of that night lingering in the air. I pressed deeper into the woods, rifle in hand. Suddenly it appeared again. The creature stood at the far edge of a clearing, its suffocating eyes locked on me. This time, it made no sudden move, only began to advance slowly. My hands shook violently as I raised the gun, but I squeezed the trigger. The first shot struck the ground at its feet, kicking up a cloud of dust. It did not flinch, just swayed slightly, then kept coming. I drew a deep breath, steadied myself, and fired a second shot. This time the bullet found its shoulder. The creature let out a high-pitched, ear-splitting screech and convulsed violently. Then with blinding speed it lunged at me. Instinct took over and I bolted through the underbrush. Its roars and heavy footsteps thundered behind me as if death itself pursued. I didn't stop until the familiar cabin came into view. Bursting inside, I slammed and locked every door and window, curling into a corner with my rifle, my heart pounding so hard it hurt my ears. But it did not follow. Outside, an uncanny silence reigned, as though it had spared me deliberately. That silence was more terrifying than its screams. By dawn, I could not stay another moment. Gathering what little courage I had left, I fled the cabin and never looked back. From that day on, I swore I would never return to Yellowstone. Yet the nightmares persisted. I would dream of it standing at the forest's edge, its eyes glowing that same eerie light as if waiting for me. Over the years, I moved several times, changed jobs, trying to bury the memory. But it remained, like an unhealing wound. Then I heard of another disappearance. A group of campers in northern Yellowstone was found with a shredded tent, a cold campfire, strewn food, but no people. In the dirt were those same uncanny footprints, deep, familiar, wholly inhuman. Rumors of the forest man resurfaced in town. The elders fell silent. The young treated it as a curious legend. But I know, it is no legend. It is a warning. I finally steeled myself and stepped into that forest once more. I needed answers, no matter how unbearable they might be. With my rifle slung over my shoulder, enough food and water to last me, I walked into that woodland, so familiar yet so alien. The cabin still stood there as if time had frozen on that terrible night. The door hung half open and the interior was thick with dust and silence. I followed the old footprints back into the trees. The forest grew ever darker, the canopy blocking out the sunlight, and a damp chill hung in the air. The deeper I went, the more the woods seemed to twist around me as if deliberately drawing me inward. Then I stopped. There it was again. The creature stood at the far edge of a clearing as if it had risen up from the earth itself. It watched me in silence, those hollow eyes holding an indescribable emptiness. I raised my rifle, but my hands shook uncontrollably. "What are you?" I yelled, my voice echoing through the stillness. It didn't answer. It simply took one slow step toward me. I squeezed the trigger. The first shot struck the ground at its feet, sending up a plume of dust. It swayed but did not retreat. I steadied myself and fired again. This time the bullet tore into its chest, ripping open that gray-white skin to reveal dark red flesh beneath. It unleashed that same soul-shredding scream and lunged at me with terrifying speed. I turned and ran for my life. The forest spun around me, fear driving every muscle. I dashed through the undergrowth, snapping branches underfoot, my face gashed by brambles. When I burst out of the trees, I collapsed at the cabin's doorstep, gasping for breath. It didn't follow. Instead, it stood in the shadows of the woods, watching me for a long moment before slowly retreating, almost as if it had spared me. I didn't stay to look back. I drove away that very night and never returned. But the nightmares haven't stopped. I know it still lurks in those woods, never having left and never truly letting me go. Thank you for reading my story. Do you believe such things exist in our world? Would you dare to venture into that forest alone to seek the truth? If you ever do, remember one thing. Don't let it notice you.